For hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, European countries, predominantly rich white men of the capitalist owning, employing class, raped, pillaged, basically stole the resources of most of the rest of the world. The world as it stands at the moment is in part a product of that process, that historical process of colonisation.
Big news today all over the newspapers as well.
Thousands
News of the world.
public figures whose private phone messages were allegedly hacked.
Mrs. Brooks is the 10th person to have been arrested in relation to allegations that the News of the World instigated phone hacking and bribery of the police.
The World was buying the private details of the royal family and the royal family's
Andy Coulson, the former editor of the News of the World, until January, David Cameron's communications director at 10 Downing Street, was arrested on suspicion of involvement in corruption and phone hacking.
How far can a PI go within the law, and how far?
What is surprising here is the sheer scale of the allegation.
The World instigated the hacking of the mobile phone of the murdered schoolgirl,
The lawyer for the murdered schoolgirl's parents has claimed Scotland Yard detectives contacted...
By the 14th, his deputy, Neil Wallace, who went on to be a PR advisor to the police.
For money, for spite, for sport, for any reason they like.
Shadow, who's deputy leader of the Labour Party, has already called for an inquiry within Downing Street.
After listening carefully, we've decided the best way to proceed is with one inquiry, but in two parts. I can tell the House that this inquiry will be led by one of the most senior judges in our country, Lord Justice Leveson.
There have been failings in journalistic practices.
Actually, I've got a bucket of shit on my desk, Prime Minister, and I'm going to pour it all over you.
Why did you do it then?
I was told.
I cannot remember the specifics of the story.
I can't remember. Did it carry
I don't remember.
I just can't remember whether I brought it up or not.
Apart from it being a business opportunity, but is there anything else which attracted you to the idea of being a newspaper proprietor?
No.
The alphabet has only 26 letters. With these 26 magic symbols, however, millions of words are written every day.
The media are the meaning makers of our age, and if we don't understand how that meaning is made, we actually don't understand society. We don't understand where people get their ideas from, how they are sustained, and how we might change them. If you can't do that, you've got no hope of actually changing things for the better.
With reporters and writers scattered all over the world, the press associations gather important news and relay it to hundreds of newspapers over special telegraph wire services.
During the Leveson Inquiry, you heard all the evidence, graphic evidence pointing out these relationships between the police, between senior politicians, between the editors. Despite all the Royal Commissions, the Royal Commission of the Press in the 1970s, some of the broadcasting public inquiries, all of these have scratched around the edges saying, yeah, there may be a problem. If you actually want to talk about democratising, you have to face down media power.
The managing editor must spread his attention over all phases of the business. All this knowledge and experience seems a great deal to ask of one man, but he leads a happy life and takes pride in the fact that he is in business for himself.
Take Rupert Murdoch. He may own newspapers, film companies, entertainment companies, distributing chains as well. All form part of this massive Murdoch empire. That's cross-media ownership, and that's where the problems really come into play, because you actually dominate an entire media landscape, not just news, but entertainment, film, the distributing channels. So that, and the whole idea is you take over
Increasingly, you see this in whether you're looking at television in Russia or India or even China, where the state is very much in control of television news. They are encouraging this kind of entertaining news so that it is also a profitable business.
In the evidence of the Leveson Inquiry, Trevor Kavanagh from The Sun made a very clear statement saying, look, news is a commodity. You know, you have to get away from the fact that it's actually, you know, that it's anything other than that.
A commodity is something that is sold to someone who buys it, you know, anything. A television program is a commodity. Someone produces it, the commodity that is sold to a television network, right? And then the television network sells space within the show to advertisers. The advertisers they are buying the audience, right? Or their eyes and ears and so forth, their time.
That makes sense. Now try this new way to accent your figure.
I dealt with people, mostly men, who sold advertising for television. And they literally, the contract was, we are giving you, 20,000 women between the age of so-and-so and so-and-so. And that's the way the rates were set, right? So it's actually printed, you know, on the contracts. The program isn't, you know, it's still important, but ultimately it's there, it's not there because it sells an audience to the advertisers.
Most of it is being increasingly colonized by issues that are marginal to public interest. So what is called soft news, celebrity news, news about consumer products, news about sensationalism, sport, film stars, etc. It works as a very skillful and I would argue largely successful diversion. There is an ideological dimension to it, in the sense that this kind of journalism also legitimizes a particular version of neoliberal ideology. And because that neoliberal ideology is so powerful and it is globalized to the extent that even nominally communist China is also, you know, perhaps one of the most consumer conscious countries in the world today, this has a very significant influence in terms of what kind of news gets prominence.
Hello, welcome to the Truths. Truths is true news, news you can trust. I'm the host. Subscribe here to Truths.
I mean, the Russell Brand example is a really good one because I do think it's astonishing. Here you have somebody who's willing to say things aren't as they should be, to point the finger at places that we know are massively problematic. We are being ruled by debt agencies and banks, and that's a big problem, guys. And he's willing to say that. What he's also saying is, I don't know the answer or the solution, and that's where people have really come down on him, and he's saying like anybody else does. And so Brand, who has actually got massive public support, is vilified in the mainstream media as a consequence. You know, and why is it bad to talk about politics in a way that people understand and can see a sense to?
That 64% of people think I'm not funny. Do you know what I think is less funny? That Rupert Murdoch pays people to create laws that means he doesn't have to pay taxes to support a society while running a newspaper that claims to support ordinary working people. Do you think nurses, scaffolders, builders, people that work in shops, clerical workers...
I come from a very working class background, and I have a cousin who lives in Wisbech, March, in Cambridgeshire. And this morning she posted something on Facebook saying, you know, for all you people who hate Thatcher, just remember, she stood up to the IRA, she stood up to the Europeans, she killed all those RGs, and she made sure we weren't flooded with immigrants. And this is a very working class woman who works in an old people's home, double shifts to make enough money. She's a really good person with a very kind heart. But she swallowed that idea that Thatcher in some ways protected her and made life easier for her. For her to make sense of the world and how harsh the world is for her, she has to somehow believe that...
It's blaming everyone else. Yes. It's the others, it's the Irish Republicans, it's the Europeans, it's the RGs, it's the immigrants, it's everyone but the dominant class that are actually, you know, responsible for the way, you know, inequality is in this country. It's classic and it still works.
And it still works.
And Greg Philo is with us now, and it's a good thing too, because already while we were watching your film, there were furious questions going to and fro the table. So let's be very clear about this. It's not a death tax. It is a one-off tax that you can pay after you die or when you're alive.
Yes, and the whole point about it is that as long as the richest 10% take liability for a small part of the liability each for the government debt, then there is no government debt anymore. You actually wipe off the national debt, and that necessarily takes the deficit down. So there's a hugely powerful moral case for this. That's why I think we got 74% of the population wanting it.
Yeah, I mean, you seem like a nice chap, but isn't this really cloud cuckoo? I mean, you're talking about the sector of society that is the best...
Thanks very much. I'm a professor at Glasgow University. I think the cloud cuckoo land, excuse me saying, is coming from you lot, from the politicians.
Now, it goes back to the political economy of the media, that how can you be completely free if what you're doing is either serving shareholders or editors or a handful of proprietors, or if you are just too nervous and conservative about where the next licence fee payment is coming from. Now that's what British power looks like. So it's not 100% surprising that you've seen a reluctance to deal with either the Murdochs or the Dacres at the Daily Mail, which raises the question of what strategies do we need to try and overturn the power relations that exist. You have to fight for the regulation that will help, regulation that actually cements the public interest, that would allow journalists to do the job I think they want to do, not the job that their editors and proprietors are telling them to do.
I think a lot of people are more critical than we think they are, but they need a framework in which to kind of critique all of that.
So, in the first part of the 19th century, printing costs were low, editorial costs were low, and it was possible for working people to set up great national papers.
At the beginning of the 18th century, London is establishing itself as the tourist destination par excellence, and people are travelling in from France and Spain and elsewhere in Europe, from Germany. And these foreigners are astonished by what they find in London. They say it's like visiting Mars, on account of the common people rushing around, buying newspapers and talking about the news all the time.
Most of the correspondents were volunteers. Even the ones which were paid full-time often doubled up as political activists. They wrote journalism that was trying to interpret society, explain the dynamics of power in society, rather than reporting discrete topics and events. Radical journalism was popular journalism. In the 1850s onwards, there was an enormous increase in the cost of print technology.
Newspapers seem to be, a way to making big profits. They become big business, if you like. And towards the end of the century, you see the rise of the media magnates with people like Lord Northcliffe, who end up building these entire media emporiums and owning vast swaths of the print media.
There was a big increase in the editorial staffing and the page size of newspapers, which meant that publishing became very expensive. So whether a paper was able to compete in the popular market depended on whether they got advertising support. And radical journalism decayed in the second half of the 19th century. So if you jump, say, to the present day, there is no new independent national daily or Sunday paper that's been set up in the last 25 years, apart from The Independent, and that is no longer independent. It's owned by a Russian oligarch. So the nature of publishing has changed.
When Murdoch came in to Britain in the 60s and transformed the Daily Herald into what became the Sun, the best-selling newspaper in Britain, you could say it had quite an important impact on working class life.
I've been sacked by Rupert Murdoch from the News of the World. While I've been sick, I've got a letter, Dear Sir or Madam, saying that I've been sacked. There's one man that's had a stroke before Christmas. He's still unwell, he's still sick, and he's got the sack. I'd just like to, get that point across to the media and everybody. And that's what I've got to say.
It was quite clear that what he wanted to do was adopt a particular form of tabloid populism that coincided with the beginnings of neoliberalism, with the beginning of a Thatcherite and a Reaganite ideology from the 1970s onwards.
Well, I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, the category of the individual underpins, capitalist economics. Always has done. The more that can be promoted, sort of politically, culturally, socially, the stronger those capitalist economic practices are.
Being a tabloid is not the problem. The British media has a fantastic and rich history of tabloid media, of tabloid newspapers, which have played a crucial role in working class history going back in the 19th century. These were tabloid newspapers, but popular campaigning ones. Rupert Murdoch is clearly a very talented businessman, so he's able to use and amass economic power in a way that has thrilled and inspired many people who seek to become future or mini Rupert Murdochs.
There are a couple of reasons why American media products are so prevalent internationally. One is that we have a very big market, a huge market. It's released in the US, and it probably will, with some luck, make back the money that's invested in it, plus profit. Well, then it can be sold, for instance, in the UK for quite a bit less, but still make a profit and thus expand the total profits for the film. You can flood the market, actually, and control the market because your products are so much less expensive. And think about that all over the world, right? All of that is what in one legal case was called gravy.
Hollywood has an enormously diverse range of ideological points of view, but it's overwhelmingly going to be one that represents the world in its interests. Say, its interests are the world as it stands at the moment, where a vast majority of people go to work every day, sell their labour for less than what that labour's worth, and a tiny minority of elite people who own and control the kind of means of production, the places where all of those other people go to work, get really rich off it. And Hollywood invariably is going to represent that social structure as a natural, normal way of being. And it's not, it's a political one, it's a constructed one, it's artificial, it's historical.
I ask that the Congress...
When film was introduced, turn of the century, we had a major war, World War I. We, the US, weren't involved. Europe was, decimated lots of film businesses, enterprises that were just getting going. Then, of course, World War II, same thing, even had more impact because the film industry at that point was quite global. They'd established themselves around the world and not just distributing their own films, but they set up a worldwide distribution system that even other countries distributed their films through. Europe's putting itself back together and we're selling the films, right? It's supported by the state. There's a very strong lobbying organization, the MPAA, that helps sell films around the world, gets the government, the US government, to break down the barriers, to try to get taxes and other kinds of things removed, to get copyright enforced. In addition, the MPAA goes in and negotiates on its own with governments. They've been known as the Little State Department because they go in and they find a difficult situation and they'll go directly to the government and negotiate. If the government is kind of resistant, well, the MPAA calls on the real State Department to then say, you're no longer going to be a favored status trade partner. The home market, the history, the reinforcement of the state, all of those things are better explanations of why US films are popular than the content, and they're just better than other films.
This is why it's important that we always talk about culture as political, and that we don't say, oh, well, it's just objective or it's just entertainment, because it's not. It's a political act.
Why just pick on Murdoch when you have the Daily Mail group who are making lots of money? There are all sorts of private concentrations of power we should be talking about. Murdoch is a good expression of this.
When Murdoch acquired the Times and the Sunday Times, it was in clear contravention of the monopoly rules, but it was waved through without a reference to the Monopolies Commission.
That was a favour from Thatcher.
And there was a meeting between Thatcher and Murdoch where this was raised, and shortly afterwards the waiver went through. The position of the Labour Party in 1985 was for tougher anti-monopoly controls. In the space of 24 hours, Labour switched from supporting monopoly controls to attacking the Conservative government for imposing restrictive controls on press powers. And that was part of an overture by Blair to Murdoch, saying in effect, I'm a person you can do business with. And Murdoch responded and invited him out to the Cayman Islands, where he spoke to the mass ranks and News Corporation executives. And there was a kind of scorpion dance in which these two very pragmatic men danced around each other. And there was a tacit agreement that Blair wouldn't harm Murdoch's interests, and Blair would be a market-friendly Atlanticist politician, which he was anyway. And Murdoch would draw back the hound dogs. There were rules against cross-media ownership, which have never been effective, because in effect, politicians have been so intimidated that they've not been applied. So no major press acquisition has been prevented in the last 39 years.
They feared that they'd be pursued personally, or that their party's policies would be savaged. And Prime Minister after Prime Minister felt that they had to pay homage at the court of Rupert. They meet up in Mayfair clubs with promises of being backed by the Murdoch press at the next election. One of them even became godfather to the godfather of the press's own daughter. Likewise, within the police, particularly the Metropolitan Police, an unhealthy relationship developed between officers and News International papers. And Rupert Murdoch has very long kind of maintained that he doesn't dictate any editorial line in his newspapers. And I'd ask just one question: if that's really the case, then why did all but one of his 175 newspapers around the world have the same pro-war line on Iraq?
News Corporation owns arguably the most prestigious National Daily and National Sunday Times and Sunday Times. It also owns 20th Century Fox, Fox TV News, a network of newspapers extending from New York to Australia and taking in the Fiji Islands and South Africa and a few other places. So this is a vast toad sitting on a global market that has powerful influences in terms of the images and ideas that reach millions of people.
John Major was told by the media mogul that he'd withdraw the support of his newspapers unless his government changed its policy on the UK's membership of the EU. This is the kind of practical way in which the power of one man influenced the decisions of our press here in the UK.
Consider this rather touching exchange of texts between former Culture Secretary Jeremy Hunt and News Corp lobbyist Fred Michel, following television appearances that both made in an attempt to smooth the path for News Corp's takeover of B-Sky-B in 2011. Fred, to Jeremy, "You were great on the BBC this weekend!" Exclamation mark. Jeremy, "You too, Daddy." They call each other Daddy because their children were born on the same day in the same hospital. Fred, "Great speech. Watched it with the cycling team. I can't believe you managed to do Newsnight as well!" Exclamation mark. "You really have stamina, Daddy!" Exclamation mark. Jeremy, "We all find it somewhere!" Exclamation mark. No wonder Mr. Hunt felt it necessary, prior to the exposure of these texts, to tell Parliament that, and I quote, "Throughout the bid process, the contact that I had with Fred Michel was only at official meetings that were minuted with other people present."
Ever since these printing presses set up shop in the 18th century, it's been intertwined with a culture of heavy drinking. And in the halcyon days of Fleet Street in the mid-20th century, it was virtually impossible to be a journalist unless you could handle your drink. Every single inky and hack would have their own favourite boozer. The Telegraph journalists would hang out in Elvino's, which is further up Fleet Street. The Express journalists like to go to the Stab in the Back. And the Cheshire Cheese, which is further down Fleet Street in a little alleyway leading off Fleet Street, that's been a resort of drunken journalists for the last 350 years. And in some of these places they had PA systems where they'd play the sound of wherever the journalists were meant to be reporting from, so they could ring in the editors at the news desks and pretend that they were in a foreign city or in the jungle, but in fact they weren't, they were just in the pub across the road.
Hello, my name's Rich Peppett and welcome to The Spike, where each episode I'll be thrusting at the glory hole of news, stabbing news with my spike in the face, kicking the ball boy of news in the ribs.
I mean, it was a fairly standard tabloid story. Susan Boyle, she was the singer in Britain's Got Talent or something and became an overnight phenomenon. And I think she wasn't exactly... she had a few mental issues, I believe, learning difficulties, and she was finding sort of being in the limelight very hard to cope with. And the Daily Star, sort of red rag to a bull really, sort of decided, well, send Rich up and see if he can find her and propose to her. Up I went to Scotland to try and track this woman down and spent, about a week sort of going around desperately trying to find her, and did eventually find her and did propose, and was told to sod off. I was wearing a kilt at the time. It's fairly distasteful. But I mean, stuff like that, I'm not going to lie, stuff like that I didn't at the time really have much of an issue with. It was just kind of like, that's just part of the job.
The ideological preferences of editors, proprietors being internalised by those all the way down the food chain. And to a certain extent at the bottom, if you want to put it like that, that could be journalists just nervous, frightened, bullied often. You're not going to act ethically if you think it's not going to do your career any good.
I resigned from the Daily Star chiefly over the Islamophobia of the paper, but it was generally, unease at some of the practices that were going on.
This Sunday, why not try a different newspaper? A paper that won't let you down.
Matt Lucas's ex-husband, I think they were the first couple to marry as a gay couple, but they separated sometime after. He committed suicide. On that day, we got a phone call through to the news desk from a member of the public saying he had information about Luke McGee. Quite sort of sensational claims about that he'd spent a lot of money on alcohol and drugs in the lead up to his death. Millions of pounds he'd sort of blown. I said to him, well, can we meet up he said he was out of town. I said, what proof can you give? How do I know that you're not just you're sort of making this up? And he said, well, I can't meet you. You just have to take my word for it. They said, write it up. And I said, well, should I need to meet the man first? We don't know that. And it was just write it up. For me, I just for a long time had excused my behaviour by basically saying, well, if I don't write it, someone else will, and why should I be the martyr who has to give up his job, etc.
But there was litigation over the styles.
There was that was breach of privacy, I think, from Matt Lucas himself. But it wasn't. But you see, it wasn't actually Luke McGee's family. Luke McGee being dead, you can say pretty much what you want about him because he's dead, and that was the sort of slightly callous perspective that was taken. And I'd like to apologise to Luke McGee's family because I'm not. I accept responsibility for the fact no one held a gun to my head and made me write that, and the next day another hurtful story too. And I feel very, very ashamed. It came to a point when I realised that I couldn't do that anymore, that I had to be responsible for my own behaviour, and couldn't... I'd always convinced myself that as a journalist it was your job to be detached, and that you couldn't sort of implant your own political beliefs on your story. It was a matter you were hired pretty much to do that for whatever the political beliefs of your proprietor or your paper was.
In the absence of any official figures into just how many people will come to do all the shitty, low-paid jobs we can't be asked to do, the papers guessed. The Telegraph punted at 250,000. The Sun saw their 250 and raised them to 350,000. But those crazy bastards over at the Daily Express, they went all in with 29 million. The entire population of Romania and Bulgaria combined. What none of these papers find room to mention is the fact that Bulgarians and Romanians have been free to move to the UK since 2007. And it's not as if we're all drowning in goulash and... Cabbage.
Latest football scores, morning paper.
Today, not a single newspaper operates from Fleet Street. But in the 20th century, every single major national paper had its headquarters on or around Fleet Street. If we look across the road onto this side here, we see what is today the headquarters of Goldman Sachs, but which was, as you can see from that red lettering saying Express, once the headquarters of the Daily Express. And the Express today is frankly a ridiculous newspaper. Its sole story seems to be that Princess Diana was murdered by Prince Philip or some other sinister agents of the Crown, and no one takes it seriously. But to begin with, this was actually a left-wing newspaper, and Trotsky himself used to be one of their main correspondents who would file reports from the front line of the Russian Revolution every week.
Richard Desmond acquired the Express Group, and he has a pornography business, and he was worried that that could be used as a grounds for saying he wasn't a fit and proper person. So his response was to court New Labour by offering free advertising to the Labour Party. This is the 1997. And then when his tenure was secure as the head of the Express Group, he could then move into his usual conservative rant.
I mean, it seems more than conservative. It's vehement. Is that his personal politics coming into this? How much control does he exert over the journal?
Very strong control. It's very strongly anti-European, and it's very strongly anti-immigrant, and it's very strongly anti-Muslim. And these are to do with his personal politics.
As much as the press in its own way is dying, still what they write sort of frames the debate in this country. And so, when you have papers like the Daily Star and the Express and the Mail and the Sun writing these stories that are very sort of anti-Muslim, that sort of set this agenda of these people do not fit with the British way of life, you then have a whole debate about that, as if there's any justification behind it, as if it's an actual thing, rather than just stories which are distorted stats, distorted studies, that sort of thing, that there is no truth to start with, of which we end up then debating.
Marmalade gives you cancer, according to this.
There's a recent survey out, February 2012, that looks at thousands of journalists. It's a survey across the board, representative sample. It's the first one that's been done for about 12 years. And they are asked whether they ever feel under pressure to write stories that they don't particularly want to write. Now, interestingly, a large percentage say, not personally, but when they're asked the question, do you think this happens to other people? 70% of them say, yes, it happens to everyone around me. I was just reading, interestingly, Greg Philo's book on the coverage of refugees. He's got some great data in that, journalist interviews, which says exactly the same thing. Constantly asked to write material that as journalists you feel very uncomfortable with.
There is tensions in communities, and I felt that for a newspaper to be trying to sort of whip them up even further, so there's people doing really good work trying to bring communities together, for a newspaper to try and seek profit by sort of claw hammering in the cracks of our society like that, felt to me such a horrible way to operate.
Your chain of command is telling you you'll never get on, you're on a short-term contract, go with the flow or you're out.
When I left the Star, I did get death threats. Someone was arrested who's certainly got connections to the newspaper, and although the Daily Star obviously deny any involvement whatsoever, the information this individual had on me, certainly they couldn't have got unless it had come, as I consider it, from my work email. That to me really signalled how keen they were for me to shut my mouth, and that was the message that was given to me the whole time by this person, was just keep your mouth shut, stop talking. And it was a red rag to a bull, really, because I wasn't prepared to be bullied about it. But the idea of freedom of expression and things like that there's a very limited definition that newspapers take to that, and that's generally their freedom of expression.
We know those pressures happen all the time, which is why the whole idea of a whistle-blowing hotline in newsrooms is so important. It's why I'm very supportive of the National Union of Journalists' claim for a conscience clause in journalist contracts, whereby they can stand up and say, I think this is against the ethical code of practice for journalists.
It certainly hardened my resolve to keep sort of trying to raise awareness of some of the issues, because I didn't think there was any excuse for them acting that way, although, of course, as I said, they deny any involvement.
And newspapers are desperate to try and limit their culpability to anything against the law, when in fact it's a whole broader ethical debate that they really don't want to have, because they know they will lose.
You can plant a seed into someone's head and let it walk away and just let it develop, grow. By the time I was in adulthood, I had in my mind a very fixed idea of who Muslims were, what they were about. They oppressed and subjugated women. And I was trying to think, where did this idea come from? Because I wasn't exposed to Islam in Stanley, County Durham.
In Harry Potter 3, when they were on the way to Hogwarts, a big spirit came in, and a big ghosty spirit came in, and then it kind of got him a bit sick or something, and then the strange gave him some chocolate, and then he felt better.
What happens if you eat too much chocolate, though?
Well, your teeth get bad.
Do Harry Potter's teeth get bad?
No.
So tell me about the girls at school. Are they nice?
Yeah. But except of my friend's hair. And it says, not girls that don't have long hair.
And what do you think about that?
Well, not very nice.
Do you think it's a little... I'll wait till you finished. And do you think it's a load of nonsense?
Yeah.
And what do you think she means? Why do you think she says something that's so silly?
Because she just believes in Disney.
When we start looking at Disney and how consistently they have this similar kind of formula, model, and so forth, it's very easy to see. It's why people like it. It has nice endings, and it entertains us, and there's romance, and everything ends happily ever after. It kind of keeps repeating those things.
One of the most popular animated films is Aladdin. And it opens up with a sequence of the main character, and he says, I come from a land, a faraway place, where they cut off your nose if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home. All the fear was manufactured, and that's when I began to realise that the real power of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed.
And what is it in Disney that makes her think that?
Because the princesses in Disney look thin and they have long hair and they're girls, and she thinks they're like Barbie girls.
Well, they look a little bit like them sometimes, don't they?
Yeah.
And so she thinks everyone needs to look like that, does she?
Yeah, like Disney princesses and stuff like Sleeping Beauty and Rapunzel.
Wouldn't it be a bit boring if everyone looked like that?
Yeah.
If you start thinking more, though, about fantasy in Disney, it's not my concept. It's their concept. They are the ones that consistently tell us that Disney is about fantasy, that Disney is about fun. Part of their brand are those labels, those attributes. So we could talk about the representation of women.
Are there any good girl heroes?
Of course, when I grew up, my fantasy was to find my prince. Of course, it's not just Disney that tells us that.
The girls that say, I'm not a girl, but I don't have long hair. There's the one in my school, and the one that said I'm a big fat ugly giant was in the supermarket because it was a stranger that said I'm a big fat ugly giant. I didn't know her.
How extraordinary. Why do you think she said that? Can you think any reason why she would say that?
I can't.
No, I can't. So tell me, darling, if you were in Harry Potter, who would you be?
Harry Potter.
You'd be Harry Potter. Wouldn't you be Hermione? Why would you be Harry and not Hermione?
Because you eat chocolate and I love chocolate. We're on the train.
If you look at ABC News, which is one of the major news networks in the United States, it's owned by Disney. If you think of Fox News.
Sure, we got terror threats, gas prices sky high, but Forbes says the economy's still strong.
Which has arguably reshaped broadcast journalism in the United States. It's part of News Corporation.
I think Fox News, of all our subsidiaries, had the best increase in profits.
That shift is very significant because that has also meant that there's increasing synergies between entertainment and news operations because they're part of the same company. That has further compromised the journalistic autonomy that those networks had.
You're watching Fox News, real journalism, fair and balanced.
Just 263 days until you get to cast your vote and decide that George W. Bush deserves a second term.
So this whole notion of something being Disney-fied, sanitized, made palatable, made acceptable, moralistic.
Oh, yeah, got him.
In the conflict reporting, the audience has been routinized to watch those little blobs. It looks a very kind of sanitized version of war. So we don't see any blood or any destruction. We see this little video game.
You could switch to bigger, badder explosives, and that always helps. And I really like it up here. It's so fun to be in the AC-130 and just rain down hell. And I really like the different weapons.
So you were working before you went to Afghanistan for the Express?
Yes, I was the chief reporter of the Sunday Express. When 9/11 happened, I was jumping up and down in the office trying to get a flight to New York, and I was on my way to New York when I got a phone call saying change of plan, go to Pakistan. I was there for nearly 2 weeks, and I began to realise that the best story would be inside Afghanistan. I had been in there for 2 days. Everything had worked really well. I got the colour piece that I wanted. I got some really good, powerful interviews with Afghan women, and I had taken a camera in with me. And on the way back, everything was going fine until I got onto a donkey. The animal bolted, I crashed to the ground, my camera was revealed, and the whole thing just went up, and I was caught.
Interestingly, I say arrest quite purposefully because there's kidnapped, there's all of these
No, I was
other...
arrested. I had entered a country illegally, without a passport, without a visa, and as they said to me, what would happen if we came to your country without a passport and a visa? And I kept thinking, Belmarsh. So I can look back now in the cold light of day and see that when I was captured, I had totally bought into the Bush Blair propaganda. These are the most brutal, evil people in the world. They hate women. You're not going to see the sunset tonight. I've got nothing to lose. I'm going to die anyway. You know what? I'm going to give these people hell. Their reaction to that was one of kindness, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? You know, don't they understand their job description? They are brutal, evil, and they hate women. And they responded to my anger, and they kept saying, why are you so angry? Why are you being like this? We want you to be happy. We want you to relax. You know, you were our guest. I said to them one day, my mother will imagine I'm hanging upside down from that ceiling, naked and being lashed and electrocuted. In fact, I gave a description of what subsequently did happen in Abu Ghraib prison. They then went into overdrive to prove that I was a journalist, and it worked.
There's been a subtle mood in that, you know, from the 1970s, we had the National Front marching on the streets, being just specifically anti-black. We are racist. We are proud of it. What that's now melded into is a kind of modern form of racism, which is basically, we're not going to be as crude as to say we don't like you because of your colour, but we will say we don't like you because of your culture. We don't like what you believe in. We don't like your faith. We don't like what you wear. We don't like the fact you speak your own language. It's like we don't have anything against your race, because we're not racist, but we just don't like anything that you actually do. When we are spoken about, we are very rarely given a chance to air our own opinions, our own views. The more you go towards the positions of power and influence in a newspaper, the fewer and fewer minority voices there are, so be it columnists, be it reviewers. You think of all the input that so many minorities have made into British arts and culture, yet you probably won't find a single non-white culture reviewer of any type. We looked at the coverage of white people, and we found that actually 3-to-1, the coverage of white people was positive to negative. Because even though you find that crime stories predominate and the bad guys get publicised, you'll find stories of doctors finding cures to diseases, or you'll find have-a-go hero stories. The coverage of Asians was 3-to-1, negative to positive. And that was because nearly every time Asians were written about, it was to do with extremism, terrorism, and I'm sure if we'd done the research in the last year, we'd find a preponderance of Asian grooming stories as well. And when we looked at black people, we found it was even, positive to negative, but all the positive stories were to do with sport and entertainment, every single one. And so in a way, even though they were positive, they were kind of perpetuating this myth of black people having no presence or nothing to say apart from in the kind of entertainment field. There's a whole world out there which is completely being ignored at the moment. If we think about either the Asian experience or the black experience in Britain, the media covers about 1% of it and leaves about 99%, which is actually the reality, just completely uncovered, unreported. When it comes to white middle class people, we get the full spectrum of their experience.
We teach ex-prisoners or people who would not normally have access to a film course. We showed a film called The Green Mile, a big budget Hollywood film with Tom Hanks, about a black man who's accused of murdering 2 small white girls. It's really, really interesting because the people who watch the film, and if you've ever been into a prison, most of the people in prison are black and they're working class. They saw that film as a kind of representation of the kind of burden of the black man, that black men are often accused wrongly of crimes that they haven't committed, and that they have to suffer that. And it's an interesting film because the narrative is ostensibly about a black man, but actually becomes a narrative about a white man. So the black man becomes just a bit player in a white man's narrative.
Films that are structurally racist might be Rambo, Jungle Book, anything by Michael Bay, Black Hawk Down, Avatar, Training Day. The list goes on and on and on.
If people want to go and see Avatar or whatever, that's clearly what people like and how people want to see their world represented in the film. I mean, what's wrong with that? If it's the demand of markets, then you know Hollywood's giving people what they want.
The media isn't just selling women, it's selling stories about women. The media can't actually sell anything physical itself. One of the biggest stories it sells is the story about women and their availability to men, and occasionally the need for men to come in and rescue them, and women's vulnerability, women's fragility. And one of the biggest cultural narratives that we have, the thing that obsesses us and dominates the headlines every few weeks when a case like this comes up, is the victimised individual white woman. The media were obsessed for years with the case of Amanda Berry. Not that that didn't deserve attention, but there have been an incredible number of cases where young black women have disappeared, which haven't got anything like the media attention because they don't fit into that narrative economy.
My name is Deanna Roger, and on Wednesday the 13th of November 2013, I watched Lily Allen's video for It's Hard Out Here, and I really didn't like it. And so as a writer, I decided that I would write a piece to explain why a video like this is, to me, really offensive. I never wanted to see the change, the shift, the sides, the divide, the offence. I tried to remember the moment colours were used as a guide. Primary school. PE in leggings. Why does your bum stick out? Spice Girls. You can't be Baby Spice, your hair's not blonde, you have to be scary. Fancy and the brown boy was an insult we would throw at each other like lurgies. I decided I wouldn't choose sides. Secondary school. Striped blazer, pink shirt, black skirt, slicked frizz. I insisted it would never define me. Heavy hip-hop beats, fresh words expressed, called back, called out, reprimanded, mocked by posh girls and teachers. Speak like a lady. College, shift, mixed, boys and culture, short skirts, makeup, high heels, knowing that it's just a show, an attraction, an image. Tracksuits, trainers, rucksacks. Mandem spudded to ensure no misunderstandings about how far I wished to go. Blood, fam, brethren, greetings. Defense mechanisms, counteracting bikini bold availability. It's hard out here. It's been hard for years. And now there's an arse in my face. Champagne displays. Money-stuffed bras, a bitch on all fours, and now I'm trolling, offended, filled with rage, atting my tweets, blatant calls, no private, no point in hiding, I'll follow you. Light-hearted objectification, I'll draw a map of where you got lost in your attempt at satire, where you found racism, where misogyny chirped you and led you into his bed, where you pimped our gender, where my colour became your bitch. I'm croak-toned to my mum, who is telling me that there are worse things in the world, that I have enough to think about, that not everyone thinks the same. I am only one girl, and I am screaming at my white mum, telling her I am black and I am a woman, and for the past 24 years I've been facing these racist slurs every day, and I have done my best to ignore it, to charge through the barriers, to play safe and silent, to smile at comments and blacked out faces, to question bigotry and label it ignorance, to cool my burnt rage and take the blame, to find a filter that fits all. That's not sexist, it's banter. She's not racist, but big butts are whippable. A view's a view. Ask the women, there was no pressure. It's satire, tongue-in-cheek, a bit of fun, but I have a brain and cellulite, so I don't shake my bum on screen, but if I could, I would, you say. But you chose not to. Mortgage paid, kids set up, no pressure on you two. So this privileged jest is just too much. I'm not easily offended, but I have had enough, and I'm crying for all those who will never understand, who will never feel a weighted colour of skin, who are white even if they tan, whose perspectives can't protect me because they can't see the echoes of those that watch these videos and say, I think you need to chill out. I guess I have to see it before I believe. Let it go. Breathe. Surely it's a joke. Meant to be empowering. A statement. Her heart was in the right place. She wasn't thinking about race. She didn't do the casting. It's not her fault. She has no control. She's a big cog in a bigger system.
There are misogynists in the Muslim community, you know, there are patriarchal societies in the Muslim communities, and they need to get a grip and get rid of their cultural baggage and see that Islam makes it perfectly clear that women are equal in spirituality, worth and education. And so those men in the Muslim community who've tried to shut me down and have failed miserably, who have left with a flea in their ear, it's more difficult trying to get a voice in my sort of old community because they like to portray me as this victim of Stockholm syndrome, and the reality is they don't like a gobby Muslim woman just as much as the Muslim men.
If the means of production is our own integrity and our own bodies, women have never been assumed to fully own those things. Those things are considered incredibly cheap for women. We are meant to put ourselves out there.
News up moves! News It's always just making fun of any kind of, radical movement of feminism, always just laughed at by the Sun, despite the number of women readers they have. Of course, this is the same with the Mail as well. Hardly a champion of women's rights, despite the fact that it has always long had, a very powerful readership of women.
You can have a pair of tits and still be the man, right? Rebecca Brooks is still the man with a capital T and an M. Just because she's got the big red hair doesn't mean she's not operating in a patriarchal system and benefiting from that patriarchal system. Patriarchy doesn't mean the rule of men over women, it means the rule of fathers, it means the rule of patriarchs. Women are producing sexist content for magazines, websites, yes, absolutely, but they're producing it within a context of a media system which is riddled by patriarchy, mostly still owned by rich white men in the English-speaking world.
The headline in Heat this week is "Our Men Love Our Wobbly Bits," and there are a number of articles dealing with celebrities' bodies.
We felt that we were writing a very empowering piece about a celebrity who loves her wobbly bits, and her boyfriend loves her too, that is a positive message to our readers. And the same instance with Christina Aguilera, who spoke about her body and her boyfriend loving her body at a recent press conference. I think as again with everything, it's taken on a case-by-case basis. I don't think you can have any hard and fast rules. If there is a photo that lands on our picture editor's desk, and one of the checkpoints that I talk about in my witness statement is that various people in the office will be looking at those pictures, be discussing those pictures. If they're particularly shocked by them, or they feel that there is comment to be made, then we may make that decision to print them in the magazine. But we'll be very careful about our wording and the tone of the piece.
Poor media reporting has a direct impact on trans people's lives. It can place us in danger. It creates incorrect stereotyping, which can lead to loss of jobs, friends and family. My own father hasn't spoken to me for 10 years because of the media coverage of trans people and the impression it has given him. And the media coverage has been incessant. Trans coverage is a microcosm of press behaviour. David Allen Green has commented that it's how the corporates would exploit anyone if they could.
Oh, grassy dale and lowland scene. I can't see, can't hear the English scheme.
The media is responsible for an awful lot, and it sustains the power of a privileged class. And it's largely the privileged class who are making those programmes and producing those newspapers. Journalists don't have time to reinterpret, to take information from sources that may be wrapped up in a different type of language. They've got to translate it, they've got to perform it in a different way. That's too much like hard work. So you go to those credible news sources who tend to be middle or upper class and from professional backgrounds. That writes out a whole section of society.
I done this basically to provide for my family, and like I got some stuff for my son, yeah, and I got some stuff for me, like some clothes, trainers.
You're 16 years old, but you were getting stuff for your son.
Yeah, I had to get some stuff for him.
So what did you get for him?
I got him clothes. I got him nappies, powder.
Bev Skaggs has done some great work on the uses and abuses of social class in reality television, and what she shows is that when we get working class representation on those reality television programmes, then it's done in a very derogatory and patronising manner. It's actually a process of shame making and blame casting to working class people as being unworthy and irresponsible, and that this is all down to their own fault, that they're maybe in situations of poverty.
It actually doesn't tell you about anything about working class life. About people who have 2 jobs in order to pay the rent, people who skip meals so their kids can have a new pair of shoes to go to school, there's a cruelty in that. I mean, it's incredibly, and it's vile that, like you say, you can take these aspects of working class life. People wear tracksuit bottoms because they're cheap to buy in Primark, not because they really like tracksuit bottoms. You know, and you can take those kind of, decontextualized aspects, and you can use them to batter people and make fun of them. You know, until people's kind of subjective idea of themselves becomes as people who are worthless.
Everybody out here under the weather.
The vast majority of people, whether you shop in Waitrose or Lidl's, whether you go to work on a building site or a university, you're working class because you sell your labour for a wage. And that is the defining factor of existence for the vast majority of people.
People struggling, trying to keep it together.
Even in those few examples where the filmmakers can find money predominantly from multinational corporations to make films about the working class, actually they don't talk about economic class at all. They don't talk about exploitation, they talk about cultural things. They talk about a little boy who didn't like boxing, got into ballet and became famous.
Right, I think the biggest problem with Billy Elliot is that it suggests that working class people don't have a culture of their own. In order to be successful or happy, they have to leave their working class culture and, you know, basically be assimilated into a middle class culture. It's also used as a way of demonstrating how old-fashioned the working class are. For, you know, Billy's father and his brother don't want him to become a ballet dancer. It's just used as a method, as a way of saying, look how old-fashioned and these working class people are. They don't understand creativity, and they don't understand aspiration, and they don't understand ambition.
Or they tell you a story about a mining community that has a brass. Actually, I like brass lock.
No, I like brass lock. I'm like, don't do brass lock. I do justice.
I know, yeah. Billy Elliot can fucking have it.
Yeah.
It's that idea that in order to kind of function, you have to be included, but you're included in a society in which, as a working class person, you're actually derided and denigrated, just generally speaking, all the time. Working class life is looked down upon. I mean, again, just to go back, I mean, at one point, you know, a huge percentage of people in this country lived on council estates and there was no stigma. I think the reason class isn't talked about because class is so significant, and I think a lot of people would have to start looking at their own class position.
And the thing is, you can lack the discursive structures to talk about class, but the thing itself is still active. So what you have is a situation where people can't map what's going on. So there's all these kind of effects, but you can't sort of trace them back to the causes.
What we need is far more grassroots. We need a much more diverse and pluralistic media, which will counter that corporate layer. I kind of think of it as a layer of oil that goes across the top of everything, that is becoming impenetrable and is killing all life beneath it. And actually what we need to find ways of dispelling that layer of oil and actually allowing new media enterprises and endeavours to grow and flourish.
Welcome to the headline event of Bristol Radical Film Festival 2014. We made it. My name's Steve, I'm one of the organisers.
It's pretty easy now to get hold of the means of representation. It's pretty easy to organise a screening. It's pretty easy to get hold of a DVD and a DVD player and a projector and a bit of sheet to show a film. And so we can show films wherever we like. We can think inventively and creatively about why are we showing the films that we're showing and why are we showing them where we're showing them as well.
They're there, and the more they're there, the more other people realise that it's possible to do something and to have a counter voice. I don't think that's ever going to stop.
And I think one of the interesting things about that is that you can watch a film from anywhere in the world and people will start drawing connections to their own lives and their own experience in the community. Let's think about creating a kind of culture that is vibrant, that is for the community, that has the interests of the community at heart, that isn't about making money, that isn't just about bums on seats, appealing to the lowest common denominator, to see how film can contribute to society.
people were writing in the 1990s that there was going to be a rise of citizen journalism, and the kind of conditions of cheap, popular publishing we had in the first half of the 19th century would be reproduced now.
One of the models of the last, trying to think how long ago it was now.
We came to Seattle as steel workers and environmentalists committed to the cause of social justice to our people and our planet.
In that Battle of Seattle, if we go back to all of the big protests where the first kind of new social movements were arising against the World Trade Organization, out of that sprang indie media.
One of the critical aspects to this center is that it's been a clearinghouse of information for lots of individuals, not only who live in Seattle, but have been coming in from around the country and around the globe to participate in the events this week. And we are providing a base of operation for journalists and others who are going out into the streets and capturing the content, editing the content, and then distributing it over the internet, over satellite, over faxes, literally around the world.
Indie media then spread across the world to very, very many countries. Dozens of countries around the world suddenly had these independent media centres run largely by volunteers, but providing an alternative news service to the mainstream. Now, they came up for all sorts of abuse. They had to struggle on all sorts of levels. Governments tried shutting them down. They tried throwing their servers out. They tried, preventing journalists from reporting that news. That went on for about a decade and was incredibly successful. They somehow have to survive in this marketplace that has been kind of completely dominated by this massive oil slick going across the top. So it's, that's the struggle, is then how do they survive?
I got the wishbone blues, I'm gonna bed and you all around.
Yes, class has to remain central, and capital has to be critiqued.
You know, your boss, Mr. Walt Disney, is really a wonderful artist.
The Disney Company is one of those companies that are big media conglomerates that some people are saying don't have that much power anymore because we have all this wonderful new media. They're not saying, okay, audience, fans, public, consumers, you take over. They are able to invest in all this new technology and stuff. They're not going away. They're not giving up.
Reach for the sky.
The press groups colonized cyberspace, and they completely annihilated competition.
Other sites and smaller cottage industry magazines and websites are headed by all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds. That's the massive freedom that the internet gives us. Unfortunately, the labour issues involved are still not worked out.
We think there's pluralism in a digital age. Some of the latest analysis on this shows that 70% of browsing time online is to 5 major news corporations.
They set up these free news websites in the first instance, cross-promoted them, supported them with news gathering teams, and they reproduced the hegemony of the press.
Things have to change. That's not completely absent from the agenda. What is absent is the change itself. There was a concerted effort to say that phone hacking is the result of just a few bad apples, and the more bad apples that emerge, and the more we find that it's spread not just to the News of the World and the Sun, but across different newspapers, the more we find more people involved in this at all different levels of the Metropolitan Police, yet somehow it's never systemic.
First Amendment fundamentalists will scream licensing of newspapers and, direct government intervention of the news. I'm not entirely sure that we can claim that when we look around Europe and we can say, Interesting, Finland has that, Norway has that. They have a much more diverse news landscape than us as a consequence.
Security and prosperity for all of the people.
Those people in the current climate who are saying that there should be no public involvement at all with the running of newspapers forget that British newspapers are subsidised by ordinary people through the VAT exemption. It's something like £600 million of VAT exemption. Now that's public money. If they don't like the fact that the state is involved, hand that money back.
One of the things you have to insist that people realize that television doesn't come with commercials and advertising.
Send a message today. It's flashed on a screen, too quick to see. But still you get it subliminally.
So you have to get them to think in terms of not assuming what they're used to is the only way to do it.
Television was a medium that was shaped by public service broadcasting, producing a great institution and great programs. So the internet can also be shaped in the way that serves a greater public purpose.
Thank you very much. That is our look at internet. Stay tuned now for this week's computer news on Random Access.
Computer Chronicles is brought to you in part by Intel.
What we need is to break up these powerful media organisations and to get a much more diverse view of the British economy and British society. And again, that's not going to happen without sustained political campaigning.
Secure representation in any form of judicial hearing.
Online journalism is cheap, so public money will go a long way in producing a great effervescence, a renaissance of journalism.
We've got to get out of that way of thinking that the only way to have some element of this thing we might call freedom is through the market. The market has its own issues and its own agendas that it will push fiercely. That also needs regulating, just like government interference needs to be blocked out. You can have the both.
We need effective regulation with teeth, and we need a change in culture in editorial offices, a culture which educates and informs rather than just exploits for titillation, a culture that reports things in the public interest rather than the half-baked notion of what the public might be interested in, a culture overall of accuracy, dignity and respect.